You hear it every single election. Every vote counts. But who is actually allowed to vote? Here's what you need to know before you head to the polls. The rules are clear. You have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. In fact, Georgia voters go through a citizenship verification process, so no one slips through the cracks. The Secretary of State's office says that this process works. It did its first citizenship review audit in the state's history ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. Back then, around 1,600 people tried to register to vote, but were stopped once they didn't pass the citizenship check. The office says none of them have cast ballots in Georgia elections. Though non-citizens can't vote, returning citizens can. People lose their voting rights once they are convicted of a felony, but those rights are restored once the sentence is terminated or off paper. This means that you've served all your time, paid all of your fees, are off parole and not on probation. Pre-trial detention and misdemeanors don't restrict voting rights. Voters without a fixed address can also vote, including those experiencing homelessness. Georgia law allows people to submit an address of where you usually stay, including a bridge or a park. The potential voter needs to have a mailing address and a photo ID, which shelters can help to provide. For a step-by-step process on how to become a Georgia voter, head to 11alive.com/vote. Election season is here, but you don't have to physically get to the polls to vote. An absentee ballot, also known as a mail-in ballot, allows you to vote if you can't get to the polls on election day, so here are the steps. First, request an absentee ballot by the deadline. In Georgia, you don't need to give a reason. You can request an absentee ballot online, by mail, or even in person. Fill out the form, and if it's approved, your ballot will be mailed to you. Once you get it, select your choices, sign the ballot, and mail it, or drop it off in a drop box. Just make sure it's in your county. Third, you can track your vote online. You could do this by heading to the My Voter page of the Secretary of State's website. Log in, and then head to the absentee ballot section. Or you can use Ballot Tracks, a tool the U.S. Postal Service provides. We have all of these details, including a step-by-step guide on absentee ballots on 11alive.com/vote. Did you request an absentee ballot? Let's walk you through some common mistakes people make so you can avoid them. This can look like voting for more than one candidate, forgetting to sign your ballot, or not including the identification details requested. All of these can spoil your ballot. You can contact your county registrar for guidance on how to cure it and correct your mistakes. Don't worry, they'll contact you if there's an issue too. This is often a document you have to fill out and sign. Never got your ballot? You can cancel it by making a written request to your county registrar, and you'll be able to vote in person. In extreme circumstances, like if you're in the hospital, your county may be able to deliver your absentee ballot. And just because you have an absentee ballot doesn't mean you can't vote in person. On election day, you can give your absentee ballot to the polling manager at your polling place, and they'll give you a regular ballot so you can cast your vote. Remember, a ballot must be received by the county registrar no later than the close of polls on election day. To view the Secretary of State's full absentee voter guide, head to 11alive.com/vote. Georgia is cleaning out its voter rolls, which means you could be cut from the list. Here's what you need to know to make sure you can vote at the polls. Cleaning out the voter rolls is a routine process, but in Georgia, anyone can challenge a person's voter registration. Right now, there are more than 8 million registered voters in Georgia, but only about 7 million of those voters are considered active. That means about 1 million haven't voted recently, and that puts them at risk of being removed from the voter rolls. A new election law went into effect, making it easier to challenge a person's voter registration. Reasons like if the registered voter is believed to be dead, if they had an active voter registration somewhere else, or if tax exemptions prove their primary residence is somewhere other than where they are trying to register. If any of those prove to be true, Senate Bill 189 makes it legal to nix that voter from the rolls. That's why it's important now more than ever to make sure your registration is up to date. It's an easy process. Head to My Voter page on the Secretary of State's website and make sure to have your Georgia ID or your driver's license handy. You'll need to enter your information. And if your registration, address, and personal information are still accurate, great. If it isn't, update it or register to vote all over again. For a closer look at the law that we just covered or how to update your registration, head to 11alive.com/vote. Hey Georgia, do you know where your polling location is? Here's how you can check before you head to the polls. Every voter is mailed a card when they register to vote in Georgia. It has your precinct and polling location address. Can't find your card? There's an online version on the My Voter page section of the Secretary of State's website. Just log in. In the personal information section, you'll see a link to your precinct card. That'll tell you where you can cast your ballot on Election Day. There's also a link that lets you email this card to yourself, so you don't have to log in every election. You can also call your county registrar's office and get your polling location over the phone. Remember, you have to be in line by the time the polls close to cast your ballot. To get prepared for this election day, head to 11alive.com/vote. Georgia's Secretary of State's office is fighting for fair and transparent elections, and that includes keeping a careful eye on what happens at the polls. Georgia uses poll watchers as part of that process. These are people who observe at a polling place on Election Day or during early voting. And they're allowed to get a behind-the-scenes look at the vote counting process. Georgia law lets each political party designate up to 2 poll watchers per precinct. Nonpartisan candidates get 1. Now, these are different from poll monitors. Those are usually people who are outside of the polling location, checking for long lines and issues outside. Now, you can't just walk up to the polls and claim to be a watcher. You have to complete specific training. To get a glimpse of what it takes, check out the training manual from the Georgia Secretary of State's office on 11alive.com/vote. In Georgia, the candidate with the most votes doesn't necessarily win. Here's what you need to know before you head back to the polls. Most states use a plurality voting system. That means whoever gets the most votes wins, but not in Georgia. Runoffs are common here. That's because under Georgia law, a candidate needs to get more than half of the vote to win an election. When there are more than 2 candidates, that can be a tough goal to meet. You may remember our last U.S. Senate race during the 2022 midterms. Less than 1% of the votes separated Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican candidate Herschel Walker. The third candidate, Libertarian Chase Oliver, got 2% of the vote. Since no candidate cracked 50%, the race went to a runoff. Georgia uses the runoffs to narrow the field, usually between the 2 top vote getters. And runoffs can feel like a quick turnaround. It is scheduled for 4 weeks after the general election. And early voting for runoffs, they happen a week before the runoff date. To learn more about Georgia's runoff rules, head to 11alive.com/vote. In Georgia, candidates need to get more than half of the vote to win an election. If not, it triggers a runoff, a rule with roots in the civil rights era. Georgia elections used to have a winner-take-all approach, but in the segregated South, the black vote didn't hold much weight. When white-only primary elections were deemed unconstitutional in 1946, Georgia relied more heavily on its 1917 county unit system. It allocated votes to counties, regardless of population. Georgia's 121 rural counties only made up about a third of the state's population, but this county unit system allowed these counties to control more than half of the vote. giving less voting power to cities. In the 1960s, the Supreme Court put a stop to election processes like this, encouraging Georgia and other southern states to adopt a one-person, one-vote system. In comes State Representative Denmark Groover. In 1958, he lost an election, but won a majority of the white vote. He blamed his loss on black voters banding together behind his opponent in what he called Negro block voting. In 1963, he won a seat and proposed a second round of voting. Groover, a self-identified segregationist, wanted to ensure that at least half of all constituents backed a candidate. So he played the numbers game. There were more white voters than black voters. And by forcing voters to pick between fewer candidates in a fall-up election, he figured white voters could rally behind one and decide the race. To this day, black voters in Georgia are still a minority, making up about 30% of registered voters. This runoff system and others like it have been challenged before and will likely see more challenges as high-profile races come down to slim margins. For more on Georgia's runoff rules, head to 11alive.com/vote.